where John Muir saw just God's perfect creation, it was actually the creation of Native Americans who were then, when Yosemite became a national park, who were then ushered off the land. And TR, he did not care for Native Americans.
This is Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert, and I'm Meredith. I explore the questions people think but don't ask out loud, either because they're taboo or thanks to cultural hypnosis. My mission, and yours if you choose to accept it, is to inspire curiosity by exploring the nuance and paradox of our world. Each episode is different, so bring your ADD and your earbuds and have a look around. Hey Curiositors, it's me, Meredith. So what is this episode not? It's not a white guilt episode. This is also not an episode with a historian or Native community leader. This is a conversation between two people who are trying to fill in the blanks left by their public education, honestly. It's the story of a man going through what we all go through when we look back at our family trees. We ask, how do we acknowledge the good and the bad within the people we want to remember in a legacy way? My guest and I also ask the question, if the past cannot be changed, why does it matter to retell it? How do we honor the past without living in it? This episode doesn't offer pragmatic answers like some of my others. You'll find the value here in the question-asking process. It's a process I'm hoping will stick with us as we live our lives offline. If you're a loyal curiositor, you already know that's my mission, to inspire curiosity for greater perspective. So thank you for pressing play yet again and disrupting the algorithm with me. And an even bigger thank you if you're one of the amazing humans who has left a review on Apple Podcasts or the Good Pods app. If you haven't done that, it would mean a lot because it tells my future guests that my show is worthwhile. And if you're new here, welcome. Every Monday is a new 30-minute conversation with a paradoxical person or topic. There's no specific order to listen to episodes, and at the end of each episode, I offer a next episode suggestion of if you liked that, you might like this sort of thing. So have a look around and hit play on whatever grabs your attention. All right, enjoy the show. In 2021, the U.S. National Park System has received record numbers of visitors due to the loosened COVID travel restrictions but strict social distancing rules. Everyone was excited to rediscover the great outdoors and visit what's called America's best idea. The origin of the National Park System is kind of thought of as a pure-hearted, forward-thinking invention of the 1800s to preserve the natural wonders and unique landscapes untouched by man. That is the history we know and the history we like to tell ourselves. My next guest is a freelance outdoor travel adventure writer and national park enthusiast who idolized the president who put this system in place, Theodore Roosevelt. Today, he's going to share his journey of historical reconsideration and tackle the question, how do we honor the past without sanitizing its mistakes? Professional wanderer, paid ponderer, free-range journalist, Rob Annis. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. I don't think I could live up to that introduction.
You are living up to that introduction. You are literally pulled off the side of the road in your camper van on a way to an assignment. I don't think you could embody that more.
Oh, I'm just, my wife is always kicking me out of the house. So I'm just finding some place to go.
Okay, great. Well, I was thinking about what was my first national park memory. At the time, I didn't know it was a national park, but I had traveled with a youth group to South Dakota, and I saw Mount Rushmore. And I just have this really vivid memory of looking at Mount Rushmore and just feeling awe because I hadn't seen a mountain before, so that was very exciting. And I just felt this sense of pride, to be an American. And, I was with a youth group, so I kind of viewed these figures on the side of a mountain through the eyes of these were our godly founding fathers who paved the way in righteousness. That was kind of the filter through which I saw all this. And I feel like you have your own filter that you saw Teddy Roosevelt and the national parks too. So I'd love to kick it off with you kind of sharing your version of that.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I grew up in small town Indiana, no mountains, no Western wilderness. So it wasn't until I came across Teddy Roosevelt, for a school project, that I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, I mean, he was a lot like me when I was younger, when he was younger, kind of a sickly kid, always had some kind of ailment. And then through sheer force of will, and he transformed himself into this icon of the American West and American politics. So he pretty early on became one of my heroes. And then as I started getting more into the outdoors and seeing how he was more than anyone else responsible for the creation of the National Park Service and the creation of so many national parks, national monuments, etc. Yeah, he was a very big hero of mine for a very long time.
And how did that bubble begin to burst? Or maybe I shouldn't say that it burst, but it definitely was only a partial truth. So how did you learn a more complete version of the history around Teddy Roosevelt and the parks?
Well, it was oddly enough on a podcast. Mental Floss does this history versus podcast, and the entire first season of it was dealing with Theodore Roosevelt. So once I found that, I'm just like, oh, I'm completely in. And Erin McCarthy, the host, she was like me, and she grew up idolizing TR, and you could feel that kind of respect and awe for him throughout the podcast. But toward the end, she's like, all right, this is where it starts getting real. And she laid out some really uncomfortable truths. And doing any kind of research on Roosevelt over the years, I mean, you see bits and pieces here and there, but no one ever really goes into great depth, at least to my knowledge, about some of the more unpleasant beliefs that he had, and like many men had at that time.
Right. True. And many men have now. So there's that. There's that too. Sometimes I think about and I think you've even said this in another interview that you did, we often explain or rationalize our ancestors' bad behavior by, well, that was the time they lived in, kind of a thing. But it makes me think about what measurement are we using to judge ourselves in this moment? Are we good enough in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one of the article that I wrote about TR. I also wrote about my dad. The two giants of my life, like my dad, TR, man of very few words, very strong, just your stereotypical, man's man. But unfortunately, they also shared some of those same repugnant beliefs. And so when I started getting interested in reevaluating Teddy Roosevelt, I couldn't not look into my dad's beliefs and my relationship to my dad, in addition to my relationship with TR. And so that's where the impetus behind the Eroded Myths article I wrote for Hidden Compass.
We've been kind of vague and elusive so far about what these truths are in regard to Teddy and the parks. So do you think you could give us a Reader's Digest version of what we, the general public, may not know about both of those things?
When most people at the time looked at, say, Yellowstone, or more specifically, Yosemite, John Muir wrote books, dozens of essays on Yosemite, kind of glamorizing it as this impeccable piece of perfect nature. But it really wasn't, because Native Americans had lived there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And, they were the ones who were doing controlled burns in the forest. So, you didn't have uncontrollable forest fires. They were tending the meadows and planting crops and everything. So where John Muir saw, God's perfect creation, it was actually the creation of Native Americans who were then, when Yosemite became a national park, who were then ushered off the land. And TR, he had he did not care for Native Americans. I think when he was still living in South Dakota, he gave a speech where he had said something along the lines of 9 out of 10 Indians are dead.
He said, I'm not going to say that the only good Indian is a dead Indian, but I'm going to say 9 out of 10 is. Yeah, I remember hearing that thinking, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I quoted that in my article. And you read that and you're like, oh my God, how can anyone believe that?
Right.
And it's just a shock to the system. Yeah.
So the inconvenient truth, as you stated it, is that the Native people lived in this quote unquote untouched wilderness. And so the process to create the parks meant the displacement and oftentimes death of Native people.
Exactly.
I would love for you to kind of fill in some blanks for me about the railroad too, because in researching for this episode, I learned about, I think it was the Northern Pacific Railroad. They were positioning it to be the only way to get to Yellowstone. So there was also like a profit piece to the creation of the first national park, which was Yellowstone. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting because most of those early national parks were in part created to drive business through the railroads. I mean, it was like the first encouraged tourism, where they were building rail lines, right outside of, or sometimes even through these national parks, trying to get people to, visit and, spend their money at these, glorious hotels that they're building. And, so there was definitely the powers that be it, the titans of industry at the time or the U.S. government, they had a lot of incentive to make sure that everything went smoothly and no one was there to that could cause issue.
So between profit incentives and seeing basically othering of Native people, it wasn't a real hard sell to, let's move forward with this idea. But I'm not really clear on what was the timeline as far as like the Trail of Tears and all of that. Like
the Trail of Tears was right around Andrew Jackson's time, so that would probably be 40 to 60 years before, maybe. I'm sure there's like some historians kind of like shaking their head at the podcast right now. But
we're a podcast for the people, so it's okay.
I mean, this was also at a time where the U.S. government, in many ways, was actively participating in the genocide of Native Americans. The buffalo was driven almost to extinction, mainly to force those Plains Indians into starvation, because that's how their entire food system, their entire livelihood, was based around the buffalo.
Are there any numbers on just how many Native people were pushed out of their lands for, the greater national parks, not just Yellowstone, which was the first one, but for all of them? I mean, I'm trying to paint a picture of like how mass this was, because it's easy for people now, I think anyway, to feel like the Native Americans are a small percentage of the population. But from what I recently heard, there are actually more Native people than there are Jewish people in the United States. So it's just like I feel like I'm undoing a lot of history that I learned. And so, and just in case I'm not alone in the world, I would love for you just to kind of paint more of a picture of what scale this was at.
It was massive, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the exact numbers, and I'm sure they're out there. And someone who's more knowledgeable than me, which is not saying much, but there's people know the numbers, but they're absolutely massive. I mean, like millions upon millions of Native Americans. It's one of the biggest, one of the saddest stories in our history.
It is. And you know what? There may not be numbers, because historically when people were not viewed as people, unless they were viewed as property for buying and selling, there wasn't a head count. So I don't know, we might both be off the hook with knowing the exact number, but the scale was massive. And obviously national parks are now a global thing. And so that got me on a whole nother thought rabbit trail, thinking and wondering, did this process repeat itself tragically in other areas of the world?
Unfortunately, I mean, if you, everywhere else in the world, you see Native people, the indigenous people being marginalized. Australia is probably one of the bigger places. One of the stories where the Australian government for years treated the Aboriginal people very poorly. And only within the last, maybe 20 or 30 years have been making some real amends there. And I mean, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination there. And there are, hundreds or thousands of people that would be much better suited to talk about that.
Hey, Curiositors, just a quick pause to show gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. If trash TV leaves you feeling drained and you want to support creators like yours truly, check out Stream Moco. You can search shows by your mood and even, watch my show, The Curious Introvert. For every $3.99 subscription, they give away $1 for good and support their creators, like your girl. Find my affiliate link in the episode description or the bio link in my Instagram account. Stream Moco, the streaming network that gives a damn. Listen, if the last 2 years have given you a chronic eye twitch, you should consider trying medical marijuana. I highly recommend it. See what I did there? There's lots of ways for it to help you, so if you have questions and if you're the least bit curious, Google Empathic Practice Pensacola. It's the most non-intimidating way to get your medical card in Florida. Their in-house doctor and holistic support make them the easy choice. empathicpractice.us. If you've got backyard barbecue plans for 2022, but mosquitoes are not invited, I recommend Insect. I've been using their pest control service for several years now. They have a certified mosquito identification specialist on staff, and pollinator care is always top of mind. If you live in the Florida Panhandle or the Gulf Coast of Alabama, give them a call, ensec.net. The UWF Historic Trust. We shoot the show at the Pensacola Museum of History. It not only houses exhibits of lesser-known Pensacola history, it's an event space too. So if you need a unique space in downtown Pensacola for a fundraiser, networking event, or a corporate party, take a look at historicpensacola.org. And if you want to tour one of the 12 museums, get your tickets in person so you can show the agent one of my emails and get $2 off an adult ticket. Get emails by texting REAL to 66866. Now back to the show. When it comes to your personal journey of learning and relearning this information, how did you kind of reconcile your love for the national parks with this new way of looking at them?
I mean, kind of circling back around with Teddy Roosevelt and my dad and having the new viewpoint of TR and having a better understanding or looking at my dad with a more maybe critical eye, it's difficult because you love these places or you love these human beings, but you can't turn a blind eye to some of those darker aspects. I mean, for me, I still love the national parks. I've got a tattoo on my left leg of the national park, the Arrowhead logo, with three images of my favorite parks etched on there, kind of like signifying my love of the parks. But just because you love something doesn't mean you have to ignore those darker aspects. And so whenever I go to a new park, I try to explore some of those the native communities before it became a national park, or I try to investigate some of those more marginalized communities that might have been displaced.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about when you love someone doesn't mean you have to ignore the darker aspects of that thing or that person, but it is so easy when a person in history is, like long before you. They're almost like a character. Or even when a loved one passes away, it's like we automatically we can easily put them in a hero category, like especially when it comes to our founding fathers, like they're literally etched in stone, larger than life. So they practically look like superheroes to us. But I like what you're saying about taking personal, you have a personal responsibility to explore all the aspects of history, those that are in huge stone and those that are harder to seek out. So I think that there's a temptation for some people to maybe hear this information and maybe even roll their eyes and say, oh, this is just another thing of woke culture. What are you going to do? Cancel the parks, and it doesn't sound like that's what you're getting at. But knowing what we know now, do you have an opinion on how the story of the national park should be told?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you had brought up Mount Rushmore, and when I was researching this story, I of course had to visit Mount Rushmore, and looking up at the literal four giants of American history, I'll be the first to admit, there is you still have a sense of pride and awe when you see these people and you think about what they accomplished, but it's kind of fitting that Mount Rushmore is where it is in the Black Hills, because for the Lakota Sioux, that's a sacred spot for the Lakota Sioux. They believe that all of life on Earth originated right there. And for the government to come in and force them out and then build or carve this monument to American greatness, it's kind of a slap in the face. And it's interesting because the Supreme Court years ago recognized that the Lakota Sioux, they had a treaty that, gave them that entire area. And there was never any kind of treaty or any kind of agreement superseding that. So the Supreme Court was like, oh yeah, this is your land, but here's kind of the kicker. It's like, well, the U.S. government will give you X amount of dollars for it. And the Lakota Sioux said, no, that's our land. You're not going to pay us for it now. And so this case is still kind of like in the ether right now. It's their land.
I had no idea. And I think most people don't. You just take your family there, you go through, what's that weird tourist thing on the way to Mount Rushmore? I forget. Someone out there will know it. But, you're doing the busy tourist thing and you just don't think about all of that. So I can't help but wonder, how these landmarks are displayed. Do you think that there's a way to honor the more complete history. I mean, this is like one non-native person talking to another non-native person, right? Like who are we to even like speculate about this? But I mean, in the process of re-educating ourselves, we can't help but think, how can we make a solution? How can we make it better? So no harm in like casting our vote, I suppose. So do you have a thought on how the national parks, the history and the different exhibits, if you will, should be presented in light of more true information?
Well, yeah. Luckily, much smarter people than me have some good ideas. One of the historians I spoke to for my article, we were talking specifically about Mount Rushmore, but it kind of goes hand in hand with some of the other parks, is what's done is done. The damage is there. So the only thing you can really do is talk about a more complete history of the area and what do these images or these monuments, what do they symbolize now? And luckily, the Department of the Interior, which oversees the national parks, the Secretary of the Interior is a Native American woman. The new director of the National Park Service is a Native American man. And they are making a concerted effort to bring that more complete history into the parks. And a lot of the park employees will tell you, it's like, yeah, we want this more thorough history. We're here to educate the public, not just this one almost fairy tale version of events, but we want to tell the whole truth. And that's great.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It does feel like a fairy tale version sometimes, and they had the forethought to set aside this untouched land for future generations. You know, that's literally what I thought it was. And it's not that it wasn't that, it's that it was also about money. It's that it's also involved the murder and displacement of people who already live there. So yeah, there's one Native guy that I heard on a podcast, of course, who suggested, and I guess this is in kind of circulation of ideas, but he suggested that the parks be returned to Native people. Not that they would no longer be open to the public, is how I understand it. It would still be like basically the same, but that it would be completely run and decisions made by Native people. Have you read anything more about that, or?
That's been talked about for quite a bit. And I do think that there's a lot of merit there, and it's definitely worthy of discussion. I know I'm pitching a story right now to some of my editors about a place in British Columbia, Canada, called the Great Bear Rainforest. And it was a place where logging and other industry had kind of taken it over, but the communities surrounding it were trying to stop them, knowing that this is actually like some of the most pristine rainforest in the world, and you're never going to get that back. And around that time, the local indigenous community there, who had been living in the area for centuries, if not millennia, they took a more active role in those discussions. And they ended up being kind of like co-managers with the province. So now it's a very unique situation where the indigenous community is pretty much, I wouldn't say calling the shots, but they're definitely making their voice heard. And they do have 50-50 oversight over the land.
Oversight, yeah. It seems like that's more of a hybrid model, but I'm starting to see, as we're talking and, you know, combining our discussion with like the things that I've read, I'm starting to see even more so why it's important that everyone knows this history. Because if, let's say, college students right now, they aren't aware of this history, then if they go on to be decision makers in local governments and stuff like this comes up, and there's no Native person to say, hey guys, what about this? You know, it's just like, it's incomplete. It's again, incomplete. So I can really see why this isn't just like, oh, we're going to make white people feel guilty. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one of the issues right now with the whole hubbub around critical race theory is proponents are saying it's like, oh, we don't want to make our kids feel bad because they're white. It's like, well, you can't teach history without having like a more nuanced look at what actually happened. I was in Memphis several years ago touring the National Civil Rights Museum, and I was interested in history like almost all my life. I was a history minor in college, and I still learned like so many uncomfortable, disturbing things at that museum just because it's something that wasn't taught. And, there's that sense of national shame, and you want to sweep it under the rug. But in order to have kind of a brighter future and, one that's more just for everyone, I mean, we need to look at our entire history and talk about it and find out how we can go forward without making these same mistakes.
I agree. I did an episode not about any of this, but with a man called Lamar Womble. We went to high school together, and during the civil rights protests in 2020, we had a Zoom chat with a bunch of people. And what he said will always stick with me. He said, there's so many aspects of this world that are not this or that. They're this and that. And this is a great example. You can love the national parks, be very American and patriotic if you wish, and know the truth and the complete history of how we got here and how we have what we have.
You said it incredibly well.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to, any other thoughts you want to leave us with?
Oh, gosh, we covered quite a bit. I would say whether you're going to a national park or you're going to a park closer to home or just somewhere in your own community, know the history behind it and do your best to kind of acknowledge and celebrate that history.
Perfectly said. If listeners and viewers want to stay in touch with you, where can they read your articles and keep up with your adventures?
Oh, gosh. I don't know if after hearing me ramble for so long, I'm not sure if anyone's going to want to do that. But they can find me on Twitter at Robert Annis, on Instagram at Rob Annis. I write on my way down to Great Smoky Mountains National Park right now for a Chicago Tribune article. Yeah, just look in your local newspaper or magazine or website, and if you read an article and go, oh, that guy's an idiot, chances are I'm the one who wrote it.
I doubt that. But thank you for sharing. We look forward to hearing more of your brilliant articles and your reflections. So thank you so much for sharing your time.
Oh, and if I could plug one more website, Hidden Compass, where my Eroded Myths article was published. If your listeners would like to go there and read thought-provoking travel journalism, some real stories behind some incredible places, that's by far the best travel publication out there right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you've loved a couple episodes of this show, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or the Good Pods app. Just share where you're listening from and why you liked a certain episode. And if you liked this episode, you'll also like the one I did with a Southern man who discovered he was Indigenous royalty, episode 114. Stay tuned next week when I talk with a man who lived in Las Vegas's underworld of tunnels. Talk to you then.